you're not being really accountable at all in terms of, your equipment. I mean, and even, explain to me, like, for example, the difference between a principal's office from an administrator, from the main office, and the administrative officer in terms of all of the equipment that's being requested for here. I mean, 3 boat-shaped conference table at $1,600 a piece for the principal's office. 48 conference mint-back chairs.
Is that the collateral equipment going to Cortec?
Yes.
Do you know
And apparently this is, the list that I have came in, and let me clarify some of the dates here. The first inventory list that came in, at least from what I've seen here in this letter, from the company is April the 23rd. And I understand there was a second request. Mr. Tenorio, maybe can you tell us what the second revised list, again, what was the date for that?
Well, what happened was the list of collateral equipment was first located or included in the invitation for bid, which was issued on February 5th. We submitted the bid proposal to GSA, and then we were issued a, I have my notes here. Hold on, let me get that for you now. We submitted the bid, then on March 31st, we had a bid conference at GSA, and the Chief Procurement Officer notified us that there would be a change in the type and quantity of collateral equipment. So they asked for a few days to submit that. We didn't, GSA gave us the revised list on April 23rd. At the bid conference meeting, Assistant Principal Portacio was actually surprised that GSA did not have a record of the revised list that I think Dr. Schaefer is talking about. So at that conference meeting, in the presence of the Chief Procurement Officer, Assistant Principal Portacio signed the list, and we took the list back. When on April 24th, we sent a letter to GSA and made a comparison of what the original list included in the invitation for bid versus the list that we just got, and we asked them to confirm whether or not the quantities that were that the changes are made are accurate. On the 30th, we got another letter from GSA submitting another list of collateral equipment. At that point, we then did another review, submitted it back to GSA, and asked them, is this what you want? We had a conference meeting after that, and the list that was given to us on April 30th was not the same list that Assistant Portacio signed off on the 23rd. So we've got the final list on May 8th, and the reason why the lists were changed, he thought, was because it had to do with when the administrative support people were retyping the list. But anytime we've gotten a list from the government, we'll send it back to the government to make sure that this is exactly what they want, because we're not in a position, nor do we want to take any responsibility for making recommendations on the type or quantity of equipment to be procured. And originally, I do want to say for the record that when the bid process first started, we weren't under the impression that collateral equipment would be included, but it was included, and the Chief Procurement Officer told us that the reason why the bid was structured that way was they wanted to be able to have a facility that the school can occupy immediately, and that there would not be any delays, and they would basically be fully furnished. So the bid, and just to clarify, the invitation for bid includes the lease of space. It includes and it asks us to submit for insurance, for maintenance, for collateral equipment, and for utilities also.
Wait, are you saying, because I remember that in the bill, the law rather, it says that to design, to build it, to finance it, and maintain the facility. So now
RFP.
you're saying, oh, you're right, but then now that's been translated over to Cortec, but they've added a different feature now So correct me if I'm wrong, did I hear you say maintenance, not just for the facility, but for all the collateral equipment?
That's correct. The way that the invitation.
And what's the cost going to be for the government? So let's say that if somebody vandalizes a desk or a computer, your company, well, of course, it's all going to come back to us. We have to pay for every single vandalism or stolen item.
One of the things that we put in our correspondence to GSA was that the way that the invitation for bid read, and we asked for clarification whether or not this was a purchase of equipment, because it says maintenance for purchase and maintenance of collateral equipment. So when we went through the bid conference sheet, they talked about that at any given point in time, the amount of equipment that is supposed to be assigned to the school should be maintained at that level. So we asked, one of the concerns obviously we wanted to raise is we need some sort of operating procedure so that there would be accountability, and that if there are items that are damaged because of wear and tear versus theft, that there is a proper protocol there so we know exactly what we'd replace. The bid submission that we provided for collateral equipment includes an annual budget of $85,000 set aside to be used to replace equipment that whatever standard we agreed to that we would replace. And the balance, and one of the things that we've told the procurement officer that in the terms in the lease terms would be a method in which to police that. And then the other thing is, if that amount was never used, then there would be, they have to address where the set aside, I guess, or the, I guess I would call it a set aside, or the fund, the replacement fund, how would that be used? Would that be, would the government treat that as a donation to the school system? Are they going to use, because whatever, basically the thing is, whatever is not expended in that year, that would be, I guess, up to the government to figure out how they would want to spend those funds.
So $85,000 a year.
Right.
And if that's going to be whether cash to pay or tax rebate, it's going to be $85,000 for the interim school to replace and maintain not just the facility, but including all equipment.
Right.
So the 85,
and that's based on.
But the 85 is maintenance of the facility too?
No.
Or separate, that's just for equipment. So in essence, it's like GPSS coming here every year for their budget year and saying, we want $85,000 for the interim school just for collateral equipment.
Actually, what it would be is the $85,000 is included in the bid submittal based on how the invitation for bid was written by GSA. So when we asked,
but that's in addition to.
No. That is part of that price. And what I'm saying is that there would have to be a procedure, that is agreed to by the parties, determine at what point would it be acceptable to tap on that fund to replace whatever equipment it was that needed to be replaced.
So GPSS, how then are you going to hold, the school, the staff, children, the administration accountable then for all of this equipment so that we don't have to spend $85,000 every year? Or you guys are not going to be held accountable at all and just send the bill to the government?
No, Speaker, we certainly will not just allow that to happen. We have our accountability systems in place, but we do want to go on the record because you had asked if we had generated the list that you have in front of you, that indeed, as Mr. Tenorio had clarified, the first list that you've seen there where you had seen $1,600 desks and so on was actually generated by Cortec.
No, we've
First.
never.
No, everything came from
what came in.
The original list that we responded to was released by GSA in the invitation for bid. And when I asked that question, I'm very sensitive because I don't want our company to be be blamed for providing equipment they don't need. I asked the question in the first bid conference, what is the origin of the list? And my understanding was that that list is exactly the same list that was put in the RFP for JFK construction. And my understanding at the time of the bid conference, and Andy can correct me, was that the list came from the JFK task force.
And who came up with the prices, the unit costs? Your company or the task force?
The unit cost that we submitted as the part of the bid price, there was a bid, we had bid price submitted with the cost, and then one of the lists that came back from us and I'll clarify which list it was that GSA transmitted, included different costs and also sources identified for those products.
Senator, I need to set the record straight that even I was wondering where did that list come from. It didn't come from John F. Kennedy. I'm not too sure who was responsible for furnishing or supplying that list to GSA. On April 1st, when that meeting occurred with my assistant principal along with the other parties involved, including Cortec and the Department of Public Works, my assistant principal was tasked to review and examine the list provided to him on that day, and it is due on that same day. It was for that reason that when he examined the information on the document, he noted two areas that is of grave concern to us. One is the cost, and number two, the quantity. That's why he requested for that 2 days extension so we can further examine really the total need. We wanted to know who generated the list. We couldn't even, when we were asked to examine the items on that document, that the guidance provided to us that we could not make any changes or addition. The only amendment we can do is the quantity, and we even questioned the cost. So that conference table, boat shape, 1,600, I asked the same question, where did this price come from? Who came up with this listing? So it is quite a revelation for us as well. So it didn't come from John F. Kennedy. And,
wouldn't you think, though, that there should have been some check and balance here? I mean, you know, as a former school principals, when I submit my request for equipment, it goes down to the business office. Somebody, you know, checks it as well before it actually becomes finalized. And then they'll bring up this exact same question.
That's correct.
To make sure that the figure, the dollar amount, is actually the same for every school that's ordering the same item. And if you recall, in last budget review, we ran into that same problem.
I agree with you.
So you're saying there's no one then, at least in your administration, that has actually
Is aware.
gone through and checked this, walked through the entire inventory list, I mean the request for equipment?
But Mr. Charglove is saying that the list went directly to GSA without being passed through GPSS. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Charglove? Okay.
And then I would think that GSA, whoever is working closely with them then, that they only accept those that are either initial, not just directly from anybody that's coming from, I think, the school system, but it has to come from the principal of the school. And I'm not, you know, saying, Mr. Charglove, of course, that when I'm looking at the inventory list, this is not with your name on it. It's the previous principal, and it was March 07. So, but this list, inventory list, is incomplete.
And that is correct. And we're trying now to really fix it. As I mentioned, that I assigned someone there late November to do a floor-to-floor, teacher-to-teacher, wall-to-wall inventory.
Vice Speaker Cruz, do you have a point of information?
Or follow up what?
Just a quick follow-up. Since April the 1st, have you been able to determine where this list came from? And, you know, I believe in your leadership skills of delegating some responsibility, but I'm really concerned about it's sounding like the two of you have both completely delegated this whole rebuilding or the interim and the new facility to somebody else besides yourself. And I'm not sure what's a higher priority at GPSS currently than seeing this through to fruition. If you don't know where the list came from, and it's now May the 26th, and we don't know who put that list together and why it took that long for it to finally get through, I'm really concerned, and I want to find out from Mr. Tenorio if they had gotten a complete list and it had been approved on April the 1st, would we have been able to open the school year August the 10th or whatever the startup date is for, and whether or not this 6-week delay from April 1st, 7-week delay from April 1st to May 26th or May 8th is going to result in the collateral equipment not being here, or even worse, the collateral equipment forcing us to get it here by some extraordinary means, increasing the cost to us.
Senator, the April 1st was a request that we asked for in writing to guarantee ocean transport of the collateral equipment to get here on time for school opening. And so the answer is yes, there is going to be an additional cost because they're going to have to air freight certain items in. We submitted a list to GSA based on the priorities for purchasing generated by JFK about what items can get landed and at what time or what date. But the missing the April 1st deadline, yes, it has negatively impacted whether or not a timely opening, at least with the collateral equipment in place.
All right.
Okay.
Madam Speaker, are you?
No, I still have a few more questions. I just want to, the last thing, at least on the inventory, and I really encourage Mr. Chagla, for you and your administrative team, is to review this. Especially when you get requests like that for that conference table, those high back chairs that cost, almost $400, and then about close to 40 multi projectors. I don't understand that. The other question I had asked earlier, and we were waiting for the director from EPA to come in, would be the hazardous materials at the site. And I understand there was a letter that was sent to you by the superintendent asking if EPA can identify if there is, any of the sites there that's contaminated, and what is your agency's response to that? Because we're talking.
Madam Speaker, first of all, the EPA director and her staff have been sworn in already, so
Okay.
That
Thank
preliminary
you.
is taken care of. I'm going to go ahead and ask then the EPA director to address the issue about the environmental concerns at Quezon.
Madam Speaker, first I'd like to apologize. Yes, the review is still at Guam EPA. Right now it is in another program, which is the Environmental Analysis and Review. Please understand, it goes through 9 programs once a permit comes in. And different portions of the permits are coming in slowly, so when we look at it, we start routing it to the different sections. And I have my chief engineer here who would answer to some of the concerns we have on the water division, and the Air and Land Division administrators here just to have some of the concerns too that we have under that section. And if you're asking about the hazardous, that falls under the Air and Land Division.
Yes.
And then if you want to bring them up here right now, and then I can just say some of the concerns, and then I'll tell you where we are at now with the permits.
They've already been sworn in. So for the record, just identify yourselves, please.
Can you turn on your mic?
Thank you. Testing. I'm
You're-
Ivan Kinata. I am the Chief Engineer for the Water Division at Guam Environmental Protection Agency.
Conchita Titano, Air and Land Division Administrator.
Okay, Ivan would start off, just some of the concerns that we've already, when we were reviewing the permits on the water division, what we saw, and we would like GPSs to address them.
Sure. At this point, what we have done is cleared the permits for 3 of the warehouses. I believe there's 3 for all occupancy. And that's primarily because it is an industrial site, industrial building. We have also partially cleared the office area, which was the former bowling alley area, because it is not a residential or school type occupancy, but we have only partially cleared that. We are now at a stage where we have reviewed the rest of the buildings, including a couple of the barracks buildings, and essentially what we have stated our concern, the stormwater management needs to be taken care of. In other words, any stormwater at the site must be kept on the site through a stormwater management device, whether it be a ponding basin or a UIC type device that would contain all the stormwater from the building and from the paved areas. We also will be looking at the plumbing fixtures to ensure that it does meet the Safe Drinking Water Act. And at that point, we have turned it over to planning and the other divisions. So it has been partially cleared for occupancy in that manner, except for those 3 buildings.
For the Air and Land Division, specifically with the AIR program, as I understand it, the facility plans on having a standby generator. And so with that, the facility owners must submit a permit application to operate their standby generator. With respect to the DISMOA and CERCLA program, a couple of things were noted. Number 1, we recommend that the facility owner test for chloridane. Chloridane is a termiticide that was commonly employed for buildings, if you will, so we're recommending that Cortec sample and analyze for the levels of chloridane in the area. The second thing that we noted, and I'm not sure how best to address this, is that we took a look at the transfer deed from the military to the government of Guam, and there is a provision in there, which we note in our comments, that the site that NAS would be used for industrial and commercial purposes. And that is significant in that, keep in mind, there were several contaminants found throughout the facility. And so when it came to cleanup was based on industrial and commercial use. So we made note of that in our comments, and that if there's to be a change in use, that permission from the United States government would be needed. And that's it. Thank you.
So that's your preliminary findings, but you've not brought any of these to the attention then of the owners?
No, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, how we do it is when it comes to our agency, it's one big packet with all the attached documents from GPSs/Cortex with maps and everything, and so we go through the process. Yes, it was brought to my attention, maybe we should start already calling up the companies and say this is what's needed. The only reason why we don't do that, because it can trigger another response from a different side of the program, and then it would have to go back and we would have to go back and review it. So we do it as a whole. We complete it with all the programs, which is just one more program right now, which is the Environmental and Analysis and Planning Division in our agency, and which I don't foresee them having any comments on that, but it still just needs to be reviewed on their part as if anything needs to be addressed. But when we do, hopefully by Friday, we would have a response back. We would note those things that we have concerns on. And There was a letter that was addressed by US EPA that states that the facilities around there for the base closure, which was met their standards of a cleanup level. And Guam EPA, back in March 2009, signed off in concurrence with US EPA. However, that is only I just wanted to know that that's only the environment itself. It has nothing to do with the buildings that were there. It's just the environment. And two, US EPA based it on the levels of industrial and commercial use, and nothing further than that.
When the government basically moved into Tijan, their operations was nothing industrial or commercial. How is it then now that all of these, primarily GPSS, who's been up there, special ed curriculum, gate, the gym at one time, how are they allowed to be there, to operate there, when Conchita said that there was this provision in the federal regs that it should be used for industrial and commercial purposes? I don't understand. How was that allowed then and now? And of course, here we're talking about the facility that's being proposed for an interim school facility that is now, that may require rather a congressional or federal allowance.
Madam Speaker, I do not know how that was allowed. I just do know that one of the buildings is actually two are occupied by Guam EPA. And we cannot make major changes because, for example, there's still lead paint on the walls. There's still asbestos tiles. So what we've done is we have not done anything that would change any of the infrastructure to I guess release any of those hazardous that are on the walls. We just have not done anything.
You're right. I remember that in 95, that was one of the provisions.
Yes.
That nothing can be torn down or modified because of the asbestos tiles and the lead paint. So Ms. Taitano, how then do you propose that there be a change in this, the provision, this federal provision then, to move away from industrial and commercial for school zone or school use? And has it been done before?
I can't answer that,
Yeah.
Senator. I mean, Madam Speaker. In terms of changing, the use, according to the deed, you would need permission from the United States. And when I looked at the signature that was affixed for the United States, it was a representative from the United States Navy.
Mr. Tenorio, can you be able, you think you can answer, or
Madam Speaker,
whatever?
in fairness, I'm going to need to move on to the next member, and we'll catch you on the second round.
Okay, can I have Mr. Tenorio just finish this, and then I'll ask my other questions later? Next time, I'm going to be up there chairing it.
Senator Barnes.
Jesus Masi, Mr. Chair, and as I look over the members that are here on this panel, I do have concerns as I was looking over the committee report, and maybe some questions that may come to light just based on what was presented at the public hearing. As I look at one of the testimonies from one of the parents, it was noted on opposition to the bill that's before us, and one of the concerns that came up was because there was already the request for proposal that was out, and a bidder has already been named. Is that a fair statement to say we already have a bidder to this?
For the construction.
For the construction, I'm sorry, for the construction for JFK. I know we've been talking about the interim area and the new construction area, and so now I'm going back to the construction. So Larry?
Yes, Senator, for both the interim invitation to bid for the JFK interim JFK facilities and the RFP for the permanent facilities, both the the number one, organizations have been announced. Yes.
Okay, and just for the record, for those that are listening, can you just reiterate the names?
The names for
Both.
For the permanent facility at JFK
Yes.
is the International Bridge Corporation,
And then,
and then for the interim JFK, it has been announced to be Cortec.
okay. What really bothers or concerns me, and it's been brought to my attention, that based on the proposals we have before us, and I know that based on the RFP that was set before, there were some provisions that were placed in reference to how these scores will be weighed, or how the construction will be weighed. And if I'm not mistaken, it was 70% would be for the financing and 30% for the construction. Is that safe to say?
That was the selection criteria for the permanent JFK.
Yeah.
However, for the interim JFK, that was based on low bid.
Okay, so now I want to go up to the permanent construction, and that, again, you've said that bidder was IBC, right?
That's correct.
Okay, that was done through the efforts of Public Law 29114, right?
That's correct.
Okay, today, and that was done in what month? Now, 29th is
that
in the
was,
previous legislature, so what month are we talking about?
The RFP for remedying or responding to Public Law 29114 was open on January 7th this year.
The reason why I bring this up to play, Mr. Chair, is that if based on the proposals, based on the bidding, based on a bidder that was allotted, I want to find out if the bidder selected is IBC already, and you talked earlier about crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and that's what the negotiations are doing right now, or that's what the delay is, or that's what you're looking through right now. Isn't there a process based on procurement procedures if bidder one can't work the application or do the process as duly noted by the proposal, you work down the line? Is that
That's
a fair
correct.
statement?
That's correct. That's correct.
So, my simple question is, and I guess based on what I'm just looking at on the reports, is what's the holdup for this?
For
Why? Because I do know that based on asking for the timeline on this bill, an extension on the timeline, we already have a named bidder. So I just want to know what's the holdup? Why are we at this today?
Yeah.
And I'm looking at the testimonies that were provided, and again, talking about this bill 52, and as presented because I apologize, I wasn't there at the public hearing, but as testimonies are presented to me on this report, that is my question to you. Because earlier you said that we still didn't complete. There's still I's that needed to be dotted and T's needed to be crossed. So I'm asking, where's the holdup? What's the holdup?
The quote-unquote holdup, Senator, has to do with the bonding capacity of Section 30 monies that are that's being authorized through Public Law 29114. As you all know, the permanent JFK, the funding for it is being authorized through with the use of Section 30 monies. And earlier we discussed about the challenges we're having with using Section 30 monies for the funding, the assured payment for this JFK school, the permanent school, and that GITA is actually working with bond counsel and the underwriters to ascertain which projects are to be prioritized in terms of the consent decree and the school, and based on the interest rates and the conditions of the market. Mm-hmm. When they come back, they'll be in a better position to advise on whether we can engage in this contract, and probably more importantly, how much of a debt ceiling we have available for engaging in this long-term contract.
I understand that, Larry, but I hope this panel can answer me just so that I can get updated. I thought there were several proposals on the floor when these requests for proposals went out.
Yes.
Am I right? That's fair to say.
That's correct.
So if those proposals were out and the bidder was assigned to, what is the complete delay? Because we've already assigned a bidder, and if the bidder is, like you say, and I'm just reading through the notes, IBC, shouldn't they have the mechanisms in place to be able to move forward, because we've given them one, two, three,
Oh, yes, yes,
several opportunities? So, so you saying that the holdup is the government, right? You're saying now
That's
that the
correct.
but I thought that if we gave the proposal out to the bidder who wants it, that the several options that they're looking for, and it's way based on 3.2 on the 70% would be financing and 30% on construction.
That's correct.
Shouldn't that bidder already have the resources in place to move on this project? And if anybody else wants to answer that, I'm willing to hear it, because
Senator, Mr. Perez has been saying that the holdup now is the government identifying how it's going to pay for that leaseback.
You see, Senator, I think what you're looking at is Public Law 29114 authorizes for the primary and only authorized source shall be Section 30 monies. It does have a section that says, in the event the government wants to entertain other mechanisms, including federal, USDA funding, or whatever, private activity bonds, municipal bonds, whatever, then it's incumbent upon the executive branch to come back to the legislature to get authorization to engage in an alternative means of financing. So really, because we're only working on the basis of Section 30 as a means for assured payment, if our GITA folks and our underwriters are saying that you may not necessarily have the money now, most importantly because when you passed the legislation, it was good to go. But with this recent surfacing of the consent decree and the $1 million a week payment, it became a complicated situation where now we're using Section 30 as a backstop. So somehow the U.S. District Court is obligating the fund that we otherwise would have used for the JFK.
I know, Larry, I know that that's what you're saying, and I know the chair reiterate that you've been saying that, but I'm saying that based on that law, there were other provisions in place, and if bidder number one is trying to secure the financing, and this is what the holdup, I'm just assuming, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, if they're waiting for the financing mechanism, I thought there were other bidders online that were saying, we will build, we will finance, and we will lease back with the government. So I'm just
Actually,
looking
all
at the
three,
proposals.
all three have made that statement. We will finance, design, build, maintain, lease back, and all of them has said that.
So why can't we?
The only thing is the government has to be able to say, okay, if that's the arrangement, no matter what your respective means of financing it, be it Section 30, USDA grant, a revenue bond, private activity bond, the government has to be able to say, I will pay it. So that's the challenge is not any one of the three that have participated being able to fund this thing. There's no problem. They will upfront the money, they will build it, and they will bill us with the annual payments. It's the government's side, the government's ability to make that payment. That's our challenge.
So you're saying right now that the rebuilding of JFK based on the bonds is not a priority because of what's happened?
No, I'm not saying it's not a priority. I'm just saying there was a monkey wrench that was thrown into the picture that somehow obligated that Section 30. And if you look at, if you were to juxtapose Public Law 29114 with Public Law 30-1 and Public Law 30-7, Senator, you will find that the same Section 30 monies is being pledged for consent decree and COLA and the school. That's a problem. That's a problem that I'm not sure if you've caught that, but you're using the same bank to build stuff, and we're somewhat in a position where we may have overextended ourselves, and that's why GITA is going out there to not only leverage it in the bond market, but also to see what are the interest rates, because if the higher the interest rate, the less the ability for you to pay the debt service.
So realistically, the whole picture is it is not the bidder the bidder is not looking for financing out there. It's the government of Guam.
It's the government. The government's assured payment.
Mr. Chair, can I just give you some information? When Gita was here for the bond, for the landfill, I had asked that question. Is that the Section 30 monies that we were going to pledge, whether that would then affect JFK, and they said no. Because then when you look at the breakdown that they gave us, they put pending, and that's for the 2001A series, the 9.8. And then later on, a year later, would be the 1.2. So I'm kind of confused now when I'm hearing them say that nothing was done, and that's why it's taking this long, because they were wavering, deciding whether the Section 30s that's going out right now and the 201 that's still an obligation and would not mature until next year, that would not be used towards the landfill.
Madam Speaker, if that, I was not at that hearing, but if that was what was represented, then we would need to defer to the GITA folks to comment. But my understanding from the DPW's point of view is that, albeit we've executed, the superintendent and myself have executed the technical components and the collateral equipment components, that if the only thing left is the financial component, and it has been represented to you in this body that the JFK debt service is not an issue, then that's something that I will need to defer to the GITA folks to opine on. I don't know.
All right, Senator Barnes, you can
Yeah,
continue.
Mr. Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity. And Larry, I thank you for your comments. But again, I'm going to have to share with the sentiments of Speaker Wampat based on the presentation that was given to us in the past and what's before us today. Because again, based on the allocations and what was presented to us, it was a different ballgame. And I'm just hearing it different. And based on the testimony that was provided to us on the public hearing, there was reason why this bill was being opposed. Now, I'm not saying that I oppose this bill. I'm just saying that based on what was presented to us, there's lots of room for me to question why we're doing this today. Thanks.
I understand. All right, thank you very much. Senator Calvo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, this brings up an interesting question, and I don't know whether I should ask. We do have one lawyer up there, and maybe I would ask the opinion. Well, actually, we have a couple of lawyers, right? Three. I'm sorry. My apologies. If you look at the first page of Bill 52, and again, it says Title 5, Chapter 58A, 58A 105 is hereby amended as read as follows. And then you have on line 4, procurement subject to the approval of a legislature in Guahan. And I know we're so tied into these time constraints. Once we got that 9-month figure in there, you have line 4, which states subject to the approval of a legislature in Guahan. I'm not too sure whether that means the approval of the legislature of the RFP or approval of the legislature of a contract, which is stated again in line 5, 6, and 7, and actually starting in line 4, and shall include requirement that occupancy of JFK facility take place no later than 18 to 24 months after the execution of the contract. This is some discussion that we've had as a legislative body in some of the earlier bills that have been enacted in law, and where the legislature has some bearing on moving forward of either an RFP or finalization of a contract. I'm gonna look towards, again, any lawyer up there. Maybe it would be the Guam Public School System lawyer, but based on the language on line 4, which is subject to the approval of legislature in Guahan, the government of Guam, or an education agency, and then it says solicit requests for proposals, and then on line 4 of the second page, and shall include a requirement that occupancy of the JFK facility take place no later than 18 to 24 months after the execution of the contract. Would the first question, subject to approval legislature in Guahan, would that be the contract?
Senator, because GSA is taking the lead, because GSA is taking the lead in this particular RFP, I'm gonna defer at least that first question to GSA because they would know the net effect. So they, in other words, they planned it out.
Okay, okay.
On that first question.
So, Mr. Perez, and then this is just some of the language is written in bills, and I've had some concern in the past because we've had other measures. Remember, the debate was going on, and within the body, with certain language that was put in, that how much does the legislature participate? And I just want to get clarification on that.
Specific to, again, this bill number 52 is for amendment to Public Law 29114. 29114 was for the permanent JFK. 29114 only required if we were using Section 30 monies and followed all the provisions of the statute, that it would only require the superintendent's signature and then the AG and the governor.
No, I believe Bill
Yeah.
52 only changes the construction duration.
For
But all the other language.
That's correct.
Oh, I understand. The only thing is a change, but I want to get clarity. When we talk about moving from 9 and then to 18 to 24 months, and one of the reasons as to why we're here, you either read in the committee report the extension as a result of, and for students, their reason for the delay, for accepting a delay, to provide a safer school. For the administrators of the school, their reasons for the delay, for not going for the extension, was a possible negative impact on both GW and JFK. For Department of Public Works and Mr. Perez, it was there was a concern that the statute may be difficult for the contractor to execute, and there was mention that even the permitting process takes up to 6 months, and so there was maybe a belief that this was unrealistic. I want us to get even more basic. I want to see whether it's 9 months or 18 or 24 months. Is this contract something that comes back to the legislature?
No, this contract, as we've negotiated to date, will not be required to come back to the legislature, other than, as I made mention, the superintendent, the governor, and the AG and the governor signing off. However, if in the negotiations, in the financial component, where they determine that an alternative funding source is needed, it is then when they will need to come back to this body to get their approval to deviate from the Section 30 provision. So that's the only provision that will require for this, at this juncture, it's just a letter of intent to AWARDA. For this letter of intent to be approved by the legislature before we engage in the contract.
Mr. Chairman, I will request Legislative Legal Counsel if she could please just look into this matter, into the questions I brought up, and just for clarification's sake, as to some of my concerns about the language, whether, again, subject to legislative approval, and would that constitute the time for beginning, when you say the execution of contract, would that entail legislative involvement or not? And I just would need an official reply from Legislative Legal Counsel, not at this time, but of course if she could do some research in that matter. And if I can continue on, some of the statements made in the public hearing, again, as to the rationale behind the 9 months to 18 to 24 month period, when the contractors were obviously bid on this proposal, it was very clear on 29114 it is a 9 month term. So again, maybe if we could get clarification on this, did after I'm sure that when the contractors put out the bid or answered the bid for 9 months and put out a bid, it was of the assumption that they could make within the 9 month period. Did something change where it then became, as time went along, I know there has been a progression of days and weeks and months, did something happen along the road where the contractors believe that this was, as stated, not practical or unrealistic.
Senator, no. As a matter of fact, nothing occurred other than the fact that normally, and this was actually the basis for why DPW testified in favor of this bill 52 at the public hearing. There was no feedback from any contractor saying they could not do it in 9 months. What DPW has ascertained within its operations is that normally when we conduct our contracting, we would put a reasonable time frame for the depending on the type of construction of how long it would be, and there would be a corresponding performance bond and liquidation damages in the event there's a breach.
Yeah.
What has happened is this statute or this normal procedure of a contracting officer was put in a statutory requirement for 9 months. So the remedy, should the contractor go to day number 271, which is 9 months and 1 day, the remedy would be you are now in violation of law, versus the former DPW would have the ability to grant a time extension automatically and may be able to assess liquidation damages. Because that's just a violation or a breach of procedure. Now it's actually a violation of law. So our remedy would be, because you violated law, what is the repercussion? What is the penalty? We would in effect terminate that contract, and we would go out to bid for another contractor to come in and finish the balance of the work. So we're really testifying in favor of this statute to assure that we have the flexibility to, handle that crisis in the event, God forbid, but in the event it does occur, we have a remedy for it. Just so you know, Senator, there is no provision in the statute also for force majeure. So if there's a typhoon, I'm sorry, you still have to work during typhoon hours. So, it's things like that where you normally do not codify a time frame for construction. You leave that to the contracting officer. And that's why we're testifying down here. So just allow the extension in the event there's a need for an extension of 9 months.
Actually, what's occurring doesn't make a difference whether it's 9, 18, or 24. We're codifying something. And so even if this were to be passed, you're codifying not 9 months, but you're codifying 18 to 24 months. So, with that argument, it's just basically what we're doing is codifying, if this were to pass, an extension so that if delays do occur, and whether it's because of inefficiencies of the government in regards to permitting, and where permits take 6 months to be granted, then there will be enough time as a result of the extension. Or if the contractor is just not ready and does not have the either the adequate materials or personnel to complete the project within 9 months, then of course when you get 18 to 24 months, you will have some flexibility, the contractor or the government, depending on what the issue was for the delay. There is an interesting thing there. I'm looking through the testimony. Another reason for the granting of an extension is that there will be a savings. And I'm seeing here a number of anywhere from $10 to $15 million. And then, of course, with that, there was discussions as to the rationale behind a savings of $10 to $15 million. Maybe you could explain that to me. If anyone can explain that to me. It was brought up by some of our senators, and then, of course, there was a statement made, Mr. Perez, in regards to time compression, and where you stated, where is that page? Time compression. Just excuse me 1 second here. Again, in testimony, DPW did not provide the number, but the general acceptance among contractors is that compression of times means more dollars. To expedite a time frame, the workforce must increase, which would increase the cost. And this was a statement made, attributed to Mr. Perez in in the report. So I guess my understanding here is the 9-month, when all the contractors put out a bid on 9 months, with time compression, there was an understanding that it'll probably be a more expensive project as
Yes,
opposed to an
yes.
18 or 24?
Yes, in fact, Senator, timing is everything.
Yeah.
Had this bill passed at the time when the public hearing was heard, that was the initial stages of the negotiation. So we would have had a negotiating tool in front of us where we could have negotiated with company number one, in this case IBC, to say, hey, you know, your proposal, your presentation was great and it was for 9 months. However, we now have this authority through this bill, bill number 52, public law, whatever it's going to be, to now negotiate beyond that. You're the number one selection based on your presentation, all things being equal of everybody. So now we have a new tool to negotiate with you. If we were to extend it to 18 to 24 months, what is your magical price? Can we drop it or can we substitute it for other components of the construct of the JFK? So we were testifying in favor of it to allow for that availability, net disposable availability of funds to redivert towards other components.
Again, to assume that argument, then every contractor that submitted a bid based on a 9-month time frame understood, and that's their business, that because this may be an unrealistic number, you have to put a price based on an expedited movement of material and personnel, correct?
Right, that's correct.
So the argument there is that based on that 9-month, but those bids that were provided by those contractors, that 9-month bid or time frame inflated the cost of the project because of the time constraints, correct?
Inflated the cost, yes.
Yeah, so with an 18 to 24 month time period, now you can negotiate with what you stated, you can negotiate with a contractor and work that amount down, correct? I would figure.
Yes.
So 18 to 24 months, would you assume then that number that was brought about $10 to $15 million is what can be brought down on the bid?
I did not come up with a figure. In fact, I clearly stated that I don't know where that
it wasn't
figure
you
came
actually.
from,
It was members of the body. But there is a negotiation room downward.
Absolutely, downward or bartered in lieu of. So instead of 100 chairs, we can get probably 200 chairs. You know, for collateral equipment or other components. Instead of using concrete sheets, we use CMU blocks. You know, we can negotiate technical components of the construction, parking areas, you know, I mean, an added room, you know. So we can negotiate those things, but we basically, this law would allow us, if it were to pass, then, you know, now it's too late for using it now. But
whether it's 10 million or 14 million, you can safely say, to the best of your understanding, that with an extension, there's a high probability, if not almost 100% guarantee, of a lower cost.
At that time, Senator, yes. Right now, no. The negotiation is complete for those components already, so it's too late. So we're not arguing that point.
Okay, that's, I just want to get clarification.
Time is everything.
Right now, even with the 18 to 24 month extension, there won't be any change in the contract price.
No, we've already negotiated that part. We're just now dealing with the government's ability to finance this activity. Senator, the only thing we're arguing, or let's say we're coming to this body for, in support still of this measure, is an accommodation for this contractor that if they go beyond 270 days, we have a problem. And DPW as a contracting officer has no authority to go beyond 270 days.
I want to address this to Fred again, because you are a lawyer and an officer of the court. One of my concerns I brought up at the public hearing, you have already projects moving forward. There have been bidders, and we already understand that the initial bids that were put out, were based on, again, a 9-month factor. And with that, every one of those that had bidded understood that this is going to be a tremendous undertaking, and with that calculated probably a cost that would be considered a premium. Now we are here, and there is, we are already past the 50-yard line, at least in terms of the bidding out. We already have one contractor. To change the language of the law now from 9 months to 18 to 24 months, obviously I have an issue with that just because of what inconveniences that has for the school system and for the kid, and most importantly for the kids. But now I look for the legal issue. If you were another contractor, in fact, I don't even want to ask you that question. I just believe, as a lawyer, do you see a potential, Fred, for now some sort of legal action or protest as a result of a changing of something so substantial? Because again, as brought up earlier in the testimony, time element is so important, and it really has a bearing on cost. And these were all factored in, and now the whole complexion has changed, and now we're hearing a statement that we're not going to see any reduction on the cost of the project. It's still going to be at you know, because of time moving forward and nothing really happening, there's still going to be that set price, but now it's from an 18 to 24 month period. Do you see some issues here, Fred?
I think making any change this late in the game with regard to the request for proposal would invite protest,
Yeah.
which will only delay the building of JFK. I'm sorry. It is on.
It would delay it. And so now the next question I have is, that's what I'm concerned about, because I've been seeing so many, boy, I guess there's a lot of lawyers in Guam, because there seems to be a lawsuit for everything now, especially in government procurement. If this thing were to move forward as is, you believe that there is a possibility of a potential protest or legal action? Just because, again, you said procurement.
Right. I mean, just the first, it's on page 2 where you look at that our RFP shall be issued within 30 days of this enactment of this act, right? Our RFP already has been issued, so that would raise immediately a question for any of the, and that one wouldn't even be for those people who turned in a proposal. There would be people who say, I would have turned in a proposal had I known I had a longer period of time, and they would qualify for a protest.
Okay.
See, so just the very first statement where we're saying we're reissuing, or there's an argument, is this an issue, a reissue? That alone would invite a potential protest.
Yeah.
Senator, if I may.
Yeah.
If this passes, there's never been an intent of the DPW to grant an extension. DPW would have still proceeded with the 9-month construction. The only thing that this tool would do for us is that in the event that there's an extension be required beyond the 270 days is where we will now have the ability to grant an extension without having to terminate and start anew. So really, Senator, the assurance that we're making
Larry,
is
I understand. I understand. You said that again. Obviously, you're in favor of the legislation. DPW said because it would give you flexibility, but there was also a mandate put forward by this government and by this body. I originally thought the 9 months was too short, but what I don't want to see is now that we are midway through the game and the rules change. And then when the rules change, it causes more problems. And I'm talking about legal ramifications here. And again, we had a court of an officer of the court, a lawyer, make a statement that I tend to agree. I'm not a lawyer, but you know I see that the environment and the landscape has changed. If there's an issue regards to government being the responsible party in the delay, if it takes 6 months for permitting, in fact, we've had all this time. If the bureaucracy of government is at fault here, maybe we can do some language here, and that can be done and this is where we can get legislative legal counsel, where we could put some language that at no fault if there are delays at no fault of the contractor, such as the government bureaucracy or the government inability to finance, maybe there are ways we can do it. But just to do a carte blanche change from 9 months to 18 to 24, and based on more flexibility to DPW or negotiating with the contractor, it's unsettling. We have to make sure in the procurement process that everyone, there's a smell test. And I'm not trying to accuse anybody of anything, but if you keep on changing the rules as we go along, and let's say for this one, you just change the rule once, what's to say, too, that maybe, and I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody, but if someone knew in advance beforehand that maybe it was going to go from 9 months to 18 to 24 months, and that some legislature, some bill would be introduced, then enacted into law, that could have been the mindset with some companies as well. And I'm not accusing anybody other than you have to start thinking these things out, that there's a possibility. And there's a possibility now is because the rules have changed. And that's my concern to the body. And if I were the contractor that lost the bid, those issues would come about as well. So again, my concern, now it could go either way. It could be also an opening. I mean, the best way I would assume then is, and Fred, how do you keep from having a protest?
I think.
How would you keep from a protest?
The best way at this point is let it go to finalization. Let the GEDCA finish it, whatever they need to finish, and let the contract be issued. Yeah. That's the quickest. There's no guarantee you'll never get a protest.
Well, how the best way to do a protest would be a rebid.
Well, or you rebid, but
that would be, I think for all of us, that'd be unacceptable.
Yeah, because that would start the whole process all over again.
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, again, I would like to try to find ways for this legislation to work. I think if we could maybe craft certain language in here. I don't have the language, and this is something that maybe we'd have to sit down and think out. A bunch of contractors came and they bid it out a 9-month project to be completed in 9 months. They gave their bid. We are now faced with a piece of legislation that at the minimum doubles the time of completion. That is a major change in the landscape. If it is the fault of the government, and this is how I like to work with you folks, if it is the fault of the government as a result of financing issues, or is it the fault of the government because of the bureaucracy? And I've always had problems with the bureaucracy and how permits takes and I see, and you know full well, Joshua, how permits some of the issues in regards to the government bureaucracy. But if it is a fault of the government, I'd feel much more comfortable crafting language in here where, and that has happened. The clock does stop, and in many construction projects, the clock does stop no matter what the contract says, whether it's 9 months or 12 months or 15 months, but the clock stops because of certain issues, and whether it's a change order, and if the change order is the fault of the customer, not the contractor, but the developer, which is the government of Guam, or if the government of Guam cannot do something because of the financing issues, then I'm willing to work on that language. But what I don't want to see happen.
Proposing language?
I don't have language, but I'm saying that's something I would like to work on. I'm very concerned about this bill as is because I think the existing language here is just gonna lead us to a potential lawsuit. But Mr. Chair, again, I'll close by saying I would feel comfort, I'm going to try to work with legal counsel to see what we can do in making maybe language that would make this thing more amenable to the contractor, more amenable to the government, but most importantly, I think more amenable to our kids. I don't want to see our kids, our students, having to wait double the amount of time as what this bill states at this point.
Thank
And
you,
I
sir.
will request, Mr. Chairman, that later on, if I do have amendment, if I can get back to that.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Senator
Mr. Chair.
Calvo. Senator Spaldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, with that being said, Larry, and we all understand your position in terms of your support for the extension in time, if we just change it to give the DPW the authority to extend the contract, it'd be that simple, right? I mean, and that way we would alleviate any of the potential lawsuits or legal implications on that. But bottom line, just by giving you the authority to extend the time if necessary, but not past a certain point. You think that would be a reasonable way to approach this?
Yes.
Thank you. That's nice and
Yes,
simple.
Senator.
Madam Superintendent, if you don't mind, I do have a question for you. Actually, it was more for Mrs. Chargloff, but since I have you up here and we also have Mr. Tenorio up there, just a couple questions, Mr. Chairman. And the first question to me in my mind is, when it comes to the interim campus, right, when we're dealing with the interim campus, what really is our take, or your take, I should say, on how long is interim? Are we talking, I mean, because initially, my understanding, the interim campus is to house the JFK students who are now at GW until such time that the JFK campus is built. Is that basically the extent of the interim campus?
Yes,
And no other reason past that?
that's my understanding of the interim campus.
Okay, so when we start talking about collateral equipment and, you know, all the contracts and all the requests made for that, for those items, does that imply then that there is no collateral equipment that will be needed for JFK because the bulk, or at least, you know, very minimal amount, because the bulk of it will have been bought for the interim campus? Is that a correct statement?
Well, the negotiations for the new JFK, I believe, had also included, Larry, the collateral equipment. Is that part of the negotiations?
Yes,
with-
yes. For both the interim and the permanent, there's two separate collateral equipment being negotiated.
Okay, so Madam Superintendent, if I may ask then, right, what is the plan? Since we're going to have twice the amount of equipment necessary for JFK, then
Right.
what do you propose to do with the collateral equipment that will be bought for the interim school?
Well, what
Mr.
would-
Chairman?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Before
Senator
we go,
Bishop.
before we go down that road, can I just respectfully request that I just make a follow-up? Senator Espadon was asking something, and it was on the context of it being so simple. I don't think it's just as simple as extending the 9 months to 18 months. And I wanted to quickly ask, with the senator's indulgence and with Superintendent Dr. Schaefer's patience, Larry, if we simply go in and amend the law from 9 months to 18 months, I would think that we would have to rebid the entire project, because you're going in and amending the specs to which these people originally responded to.
We were not coming on here to extend it so that we can allow for a rebid or even go down that path. The intent was really to look at the 9-month time frame that was given.
But when you first issued the RFP, it was based on asking someone if they can submit a bid and to complies to whether or not they can reconstruct John F. Kennedy High School within 9 months.
Yes, and Senator, if you look at the selection criteria, 70% of the activity, the weight is towards the financial ability and the solution. 30% was for everything else, and the everything else has to deal with the technical requirements, the structure, the code compliances, the leveraging of existing facilities, asbestos, lead-based paint, mitigation, and so forth. And by
But
the way,
everything was
it has to
going-
be 9 months. So
Everything has to be completed within 9 months, right?
yeah, but
Based on those-
that's why I'm discussing the selection criteria. What was represented in the RFP was 70% was the financial solution, 30% was everything else, and on the everything else, 99% of this activity was technical related. 1% was the 9-month construction. We were focusing on the facility and the financing ability first, the facility that will be used by the school, and then, by the way, there's a requirement you have to do it in 9 months. If you don't, then there's a problem.
Yeah,
and we need
wasn't-
performance bond, liquidation
I mean,
damages.
this was an emergency measure as put out by Speaker Wampat, and the idea is that put an RFP out to have someone respond that can say that financing and everything else, if they're awarded the bid, they'll have the project completed from breaking ground to ribbon cutting in 9 months. And based on that specification, you had vendors or contractors submit their proposal. Now, the concern I understand is that if we amend it to 18 months, then you could have had more bidders.
Well, that or we probably have a lower prices. Again,
Okay,
the
Senator,
evalu-
I'm gonna ask that you hold on until Senator Spaldon has completed
Okay,
his question.
maybe you can think of an answer and get back.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I was about ready to say something because that was exactly the discussion that was the previous speaker before me had addressed, and I was just trying to address perhaps an easier solution since the director of Department of Public Works stated that really one of the main purposes for the extension would be that if the contractor went 1 day over 9 months, then there would be a violation of law, and DPW has no authority to grant any extension. And so if that's the concern, that we would still be on that 9-month time frame, but if we just change the law to allow DPW to grant an extension in cases of force majeure or delays in whatever it may be, then you can actually mitigate any of the legal complications that may arise that Senator Respicio and Senator Calvo both have addressed. I'm sorry, you raised your hand, Fred. I'm going to go ahead and...
Larry. So if you look at the statute as written now, the requirement of getting it within nine months is the RFP needs to say it. So the RFP as written says it needs to go and be completed within 9 months. But the actual contract can have for your liquidation cost. In other words, see, the law says the RFP must say. It doesn't say the contract must say it's done within 9 months. So your contract should read it's done within 9 months. If you fail to do it, then it costs X dollar per day. So because if you look at, and this is why I'm saying to change the statute on this, the statute is saying you must issue the RFP and it must say this. So now, like Senator Respicio had said, if you change the requirements of the RFP itself, then we'd have to go back through the whole process again.
Okay,
So
but
if
let me
you're-
understand what you're saying, Fred. So even though the law says completed in 9 months, I can still grant the extension and just assess liquidation damages? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the law says the RFP must say, not the contract. There's a big difference. See, if you look at it, it says
So if the RFP
must
says
say.
9 months, I can engage in a
And so you're
180-day contract?
So
I can engage in an 18-month contract? Is that what you're saying?
But your question was what happens after 9 months and 1 day, right? You don't need to cancel it depends on how you write your contract. You can put your liquidated damages in there.
If what you're saying is true, I'm good to go. We don't need to pass this. I can, based on what Fred says,
You can
I
run it
will
by
go
your-
ahead and grant the extensions.
Okay, well, this is a good dialogue, and I encourage your legal counsel to get together with GPSS's legal counsel as to crafting the best contract possible so we can go forward with this project. So onward with the questions, if I could.
Sure.
I mean, it seems like we're getting to a resolution on this one issue of which
Thank you,
is
Fred.
the
I
intent
appreciate
of
it.
this bill. But going back to the superintendent, Madam Superintendent, I did ask about the collateral equipment and double ordering of equipment for JFK.
When you asked the question as to how I interpreted interim, I was speaking in terms of the interim for JFK. What has also been proposed to me by various individuals is that once JFK exits the interim site, that site has potential use for other schools that may be going renovations, such as George Washington or even LP Ontalan. If they have to go through extensive renovation, then that site could potentially be used for that. And that is perhaps why a separate set of collateral equipment was ordered. And that was, I believe, the intention was not just for the 9 months that I had anticipated would be needed to rebuild JFK, but when that was selected, that was actually part of the discussion that had been made with the governor and even the Guam Education Policy Board.
Okay, well, and I asked that question just to make sure we all understand it, we're all on the same page, because I have heard such information myself, but again, as far as I understood it, the interim solution or the interim school was to be used for the JFK interim solution.
Absolutely.
Nothing else, right? And so I had to go at least ask, why are we double ordering the equipment? But now I understand more fully, and more people probably do also. But getting back to the collateral equipment, a statement was made by Mr. Chargloff earlier that nobody knew who generated that list of the collateral equipment. I guess the logical question is, wasn't there supposed to be somebody from GPSS who was supposed to be in charge of generating that list, as opposed to just letting somebody from nowhere do it?
No, we had, we've always assigned one of the assistant principals to be part of the negotiations and discussions with CORTAC about, and DPW regarding the interim site. So we've always had an administrative representative. My understanding of the process was that there was a bid that was submitted, a proposal. Within the proposal were the collateral equipment, and where that collateral equipment list came from, that right now, I'm not sure where that came from.
Okay, but in terms of the list that perhaps your people from GPSS had put together in terms of the equipment needed for the interim school, you have that list, right?
That was, it was submitted by, what had happened was that GSA had requested our administrative representative to review the list. And so he did.
To review which list?
The list that was included in the bid.
And we don't know where that list came from, is what you're saying.
I'm just not sure.
And I guess that's the question. Wasn't the list that the department generated supposed to be the list? I mean, you would imagine the people who were closest to the classrooms and the needs of the classrooms would be the people who submit the list to GSA, and GSA just goes out and purchases.
We were asked to verify a list.
Just to verify, but not necessarily compile the list.
Through and not necessarily generate one, because it was included in the bid. It was included in the bid.
It was in the bid document when it was issued.
Okay, but you're saying that you never made the list?
The list that we got was the list that was included in the bid released by GSA. And when I did ask that question during the bid conference, because Assistant Principal Portacio, was commenting about some of the quantities. So I asked, well, where exactly did the list come from? Because if it didn't, we're not making any recommendations. And then at that bid conference, they said that they believe that the list came from the JFK task force.
When in fact it did not.
That's what they're saying.
He's a member. He's a member of the task force.
It came from a member of the task force.
Mr. Portacio is a member of the task force. And so if he did not know where the list came from, then obviously there was...
There was a list that was slipped in someplace and made part of the bid.
Right.
Okay.
But nonetheless, he did review it and then sent back revision.
Okay.
And then my understanding, Senator, was that he was then given the list back to then provide specs because they needed to order it. And then that was where it took a little bit of time.
Okay. And I just wanted to clarify. One last question, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Just as a follow-up, Senator Espadon, if you don't mind, Vice Speaker Cruz had... Okay.
Okay.
Then, yes,
and this is to EPA, Guam Environment Protection Agency. And when it comes down to, you're saying that the deed from the U.S. Government to Gov Guam for this property basically stated that it was for commercial and industrial purposes only. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so your concern is that since a school system or using this property for a school does not fall under the definition as an industrial or a commercial use.
I didn't say that. It was a notation that, that one of my staff pointed out.
Okay.
In terms of whether or not schools fall within the zoning of commercial, I don't know. But it was a point that we needed to point that fact out.
Right. I mean, but you never followed it to the end to find out whether actually schools could fall under a commercial use?
That is correct.
Because there are private schools that are commercial school. I mean, you figure, right? And I'm just wondering if it would seem that you would follow the natural progression of that issue to find out the ultimate end result, right? Is this or is
It's
this
a
not
zoning
usable
issue.
for a school? I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, sir, but that is a zoning issue, and so I would imagine the Department of Land Management would have, that particular issue would fall under the purview of DLM.
Understood, but then it's a matter of a phone call from EPA to DLM to say, hey, man, what do you think, right?
I imagine so. Keep in
Okay.
mind that the application comes through the Department of Public Works first, and as I understand the process goes is that DPW then farms out the application to the various agencies. So I don't know whether or not it went to DLM. We did not, I know from my division, we did not contact the Department of Land Management.
Okay. You don't think it would have been within their purview to do something like that? I mean, again, I just don't want to get caught up where, okay, well, the buck stops for our agency right here, so there's no need to pursue it, but then all of a sudden that buck gets dropped and nobody on the next agency even knows there was something to be passed on. I guess that's the concern going forward. When we start talking delays and what's going to take, we start talking 9-month time frames and whatnot, and then we can imagine why it takes 5 years when we only slated it for 9 months. I mean, and I just want to make that point. And
Okay.
again,
Yeah.
yes, Mrs.
Senator,
Tenorio.
on the issue that Ms. Taitano and Director Crisosimo brought up, I do have a copy of the deed, and I will provide it to the committee. I'm sure there are others flying around here, but I'll provide this to the committee. But in Section 11 of the deed, where it defines land use, the first one, 11A, is restricted use, and under that, they define, originally this provision, I'm just going to read from it,
Okay.
Senator, if that's fine with you.
That's fine with me.
Restricted use. Grantee agrees that all portions of the land identified as point of interest 5, 8, 16, which is on our property, 20 and 24, and any other response action sites approved for no further response action. Said point of interest sites are shown in Exhibit D attached here too, and any other response action sites approved for no further response. I'm sorry, NFRA is no further response action. Are collectively referred to as the industrial sites. Shall be used only for industrial use, subject to the additional restrictions of subparagraph 11C below. As used herein, industrial use shall mean any use except residential use. Residential use means use as adult and child dwellings and other facilities occupied by children on a consistent basis. Then there is a provision after that, item B, called conditional use. It says, notwithstanding the provisions of subparagraph 11A above, which I just read, but subject to the provisions of subparagraph 11C below, grantee may use the industrial sites for residential use, provided that grantee, at its sole and exclusive cost and expense, performs all environmental response actions necessary to protect human health and the environment as required by applicable laws and regulations for said residential use. 2, obtains the necessary approvals for such use from applicable regulatory agencies. And 3, expressly waives any claim, demand, or cause of action arising under this quitclaim deed or any law or regulation against the United States which may be due to the use of the industrial sites for residential purposes. Grantee hereby agrees to indemnify and defend the United States for any losses, claims, or demands against the United States which result from such residential use. The obligation under this provision shall run with the land in perpetuity.
So those are the only conditions under that transfer. And so you're basically saying that the only restrictions real on this property is not so much just to industrial and commercial, but against residential.
Right,
And a
unless,
school system is not a residential use.
right, unless, however, the appropriate agencies conduct the tests, performs all environmental response actions necessary to protect human health and the environment as required by applicable laws and regulations for such residential use.
for such residential use? Again, we're just going back to that the only condition upon this is, the only restrictions is really on residential use, not so much on use as a public school.
There is a later provision in the deed that also has a process in which the local government can request an amendment of the deed. So, for example, if the government would like to use the interim campus past an interim state and acquire it as a school, then I would suggest, or I would think that the local government would send a letter to Naval Facilities and then submit all of the things, and then it'll be a process in which that would occur, and I would just suggest that.
Right, and that's just process.
Right, and that's the
But
engineering.
going back to EPA then.
And that's what we noted. We're going to note that is something that they should address. We have no jurisdiction on making that request.
Understood,
We're just going to
but
note
that's
it
not
on
my
our.
question.
Yes.
My question involves now in terms of the environment itself. In your determination, in Guam EPA's determination, in terms of any toxicity or hazardous material or anything else in the area, would that location be safe for our students? Or are there studies being conducted right now to make that determination?
We did note, yeah.
I think that they're suggesting that we do chloridane testing.
Samplings.
And if I can just explain, chloridane was legally applied at the foundation for all the buildings on Tizon. And although we've not, and chloridane is exposed when you touch the foundation, and although we haven't touched the foundation, we're willing to agree to a reasonable testing period. It takes about a week or 10 days for a fast track test, and then we'll go forward. But
well, let me just ask you, okay, before we even go any further, and I understand that right now, what are the dangers of that? What is it, chlorination?
Chloridine?
Chlorine?
Chloridane.
Chloridane,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a termiticide.
What are the health effects of chloridane?
I don't have that at the top of my head, but I can sure get a fact sheet for you. But it is a termiticide. It kills termites.
Okay, for termites.
Yeah.
Senator, it's used in almost all the home construction on Guam in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Back in the day. Is it used any longer?
I'm not sure.
My understanding.
EPA?
It might be
I'll double check. The last time I looked at it, we aren't supposed to be using chloridane, but I think there's a recent ruling, and I don't have that information, but I'll make sure I get it for you, sir.
Okay. I mean, again, we're just talking right now because that was one of the issues that may be holding up this whole project. And if there is a human health hazard on this one, then I can understand the concern. However, if it's still being used in our island as termite control, then it's like, geez, it seems to be all over the place. Not to say that it's safe, but to say that it's common. Right.
I think the key is that it was legally applied, but I think the exposure is if you touch the foundation and then allow the substance to be exposed. It has to do with, the foundations are capped. So I think that the testing, if I'm not mistaken, the testing that they're suggesting now would confirm that there's no chloridane in the soil.
Okay.
Right? Am I...
Okay, and I just wanted to get those points across in my own mind and to share that with everybody here. At least we have some basis of understanding. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and call a recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I want to ask that the panel please return tomorrow, and we'll continue again at 9 o'clock.